So today I'm going to discuss the appendix. Okay, so we'll briefly see the gross anatomy of appendix, and also we will discuss the uh, histology of colon and appendix. Okay, so if you have any doubts, you can unmute your mic and you can talk to me. So, what is appendix? What do you can anyone tell me what the word appendix means? Anyone? So here is appendix. What do you mean by, what do you understand by the word appendix?
It's a projection. It's finger-like.
Appendix means it's an appendage, it is an add-on. Okay, so it is like an extension from the main uh, structure, that is the colon. Okay, so the appendix is attached, or it is an extension from the initial part of the colon, that is the cecum. Okay, so this part is the cecum and appendix is attached to the cecum, and the appendix is, in majority of the books, it is mentioned as a vestigial organ, but it is not so. It does have some functions which we'll discuss later. So appendix is also called vermiform appendix. Vermiform means it is like a worm. Okay, and when you open the abdomen, anterior abdominal wall, you will be greeted with this curtain, which is the omentum, greater omentum, which is attached to the greater curvature of the stomach. And if you lift the greater omentum, then you will see the intestinal loops. The small intestine is kind of in the middle, enclosed by a outer margin formed by this large intestine. Okay, the large intestine begins at the cecum, which is situated usually in the right iliac fossa. So then from the cecum you have the ascending colon, which makes a turn at the hepatic flexure or the right colic flexure, and then the transverse colon, here it is kind of elevated to show the intestinal loops, but it hangs loose like this, it falls on the intestinal loops, and then it makes another bend here and comes down. So it surrounds the small intestine which has duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, three parts. The ileum is the one which attaches, or which continues, or which opens into the large intestine. Okay, so the appendix is attached to the cecum, where you can see there are a whitish appearing band which runs the length of entire length of the large intestine, which is called the taenia coli. There are three taenia coli which are present on the large intestine, and the appendix is attached to the cecum at the confluence of these three taenia coli. So that will help you identify the appendix. So the vermiform appendix, which uh, basically is called vermiform because it is like a worm, slender worm like, is a narrow blind ending tube, meaning at one end it is blind, and usually it is around 6 to 10 centimeters in length in an adult, and it joins the cecum at the posterior medial wall of the cecum below the ileocolic junction. And the appendix grows as you grow older in length and diameter during the early childhood, and reaches around about the adult size by around 3 years of age. And the appendix usually lies in the right iliac fossa, but the tip of the appendix may occupy many or any of the several positions that it can take, like which you can see here in this diagram. So this is one of the Taenia coli, and there are 3 such Taenia coli. One will be on the opposite end of the mesocolon, and one will be towards the mesocolon, one will be on the posterior aspect. So these 3 Taenia coli will come and they kind of come together, and that is where the appendix will begin. And the appendix, the tip of the appendix can be pointing towards the pelvis, or it can be just going straight down from the cecum, or it can be paracecal or paracolic, or it can be behind the colon, or it can be pointing towards the sacral promontory, or if the mesentery attached to the appendix is slightly longer, it can go behind or in front of the terminal portion of ileum, which comes and opens into the cecum. Okay, so ileocolic junction is here, appendix is below, and posteromedial, on the posteromedial aspect of the cecum, below the ileocolic junction. And the appendix, the base will be always here, but the tip may be positioned in any of these positions. Like you have pelvic, subcecal, promontoric, paracolic, retrocecal, pre-ileal and post-ileal. But the most commonest is the retrocecal position of the appendix. So it can go behind the colon and the cecum. Okay, so in clinical practice, when we actually open the abdomen and try to find the appendix, it is usually located behind the cecum and the colon. So retrocecal or retrocolic position is the most commonest location for the tip of the appendix. So whenever it is behind the colon or the cecum, it is anterior to the iliacus and the psoas major muscles. Or the next commonest position is the pelvic position. Okay, so it actually crosses the pelvic brim and points into the true pelvis. Okay, and when it descends down into the pelvis, it actually usually accompanies the uterine tube and the ovary in the females. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, there are other positions like pre-ileal, post-ileal, subcecal and paracolic or prececal, and the promontoric positions. And usually whenever there is it is pre-ileal or post-ileal, the mesentery that is attached to the appendix may be slightly longer, allowing for the greater mobility, so it can go and get stuck between or behind the ileum. So there are other variations in the position of appendix, like as it is shown in this diagram. Because the gut undergoes a rotation and it comes down and initially enters the abdomen from the umbilicus, and it goes and sits in the left iliac fossa initially. So after that, if the further rotation of the gut does not take place, then you may find the appendix to be located in the left iliac fossa. Or as the further rotation takes place, the cecum and appendix they reach the umbilical position and then the subhepatic position, and from subhepatic position the cecum descends down. So along that path you may find the cecum and appendix located anywhere. So these are variations because of probably abnormal gut rotation, malrotation of the gut, or incomplete rotation of the gut, or it can also descend down into the pelvis sometimes. Okay, so these are variations in the position, but most commonest location is in a normal living person. It's called the McBurney's point, where you draw a line from the anterior superior iliac spine. So here you have the anterior superior iliac spine, and here you have the umbilicus. If you draw a line passing from the anterior superior iliac spine to the umbilicus, that is called the spino-umbilical line. Along that spino-umbilical line, you divide that line into 3 equal parts. The cecum and appendix are located at the junction of the medial 2/3 and the lateral 1/3, and that point is called the McBurney's point. Okay, McBurney's point. So that is the surface marking for the base of the appendix, but it's not always situated here. It may be slightly above or below, but that is the most common that is the surface marking for the appendix, and that is the most common location also for the base of the appendix. The position of this appendix is dependent on your posture, and if the cecum is distended quite a bit because of fecal loading and other factors like pregnancy. The uterus, which when enlarges, it actually pushes the cecum and appendix above. So it is not a fixed position. It can actually vary depending on many factors. So coming to the gross anatomical features, the appendix is like 6 to 10 centimeters long, attached onto the cecum at the confluence of these tinea coli. You can see there is one band of vertical smooth muscle fibers here, here, and on this side. So these three tinea, three bands of smooth muscle, which are kind of like concentrated external layer of the muscularis externa, that is a vertical layer. Longitudinal layer actually forms three bands. These are called tinea coli. These are specific to the large intestine, and where they come together, that is the point where the base of the appendix is usually located. Usually the lateral aspect or the right side of the cecum is more saccular, or it is more enlarged rather than the left side or the medial side. So the kind of the appendix attachment is kind of pushed posterior-medially. Okay, and this appendix has a continuous outer layer of longitudinal muscles. Appendix has a continuous longitudinal layer of smooth muscle. Because once these tinea coli come together, they completely form almost a complete layer around the appendix, but some places it may be deficient. So the serosa may be directly in continuity with the or in communication with the submucosa, except those places. Everywhere else you will find a outer longitudinal layer covering the appendix, and these longitudinal muscles are formed by the coalescence of the three tinea coli, and the lumen of the appendix is irregularly narrowed because of mainly the submucosal lymphoid tissue. You will find large amounts of gut associated lymphoid tissue aggregating in the submucosa and mucosa of the just under the mucosal layer of the appendix, and because that is so large that it can push into the or it can disrupt the epithelial lining of the appendix, so causing lumen to be irregular. Okay, and attached to the appendix is this triangular fold of double layer of fold of peritoneum, which is the mesoappendix or the mesentery of the appendix, which is called the mesoappendix, which transmits the nerves and the vessels, blood vessels, the appendicular artery and the nerves that come in the splanchnic nerves or the autonomic nerves which come and supply the appendix are also transmitted in the mesoappendix. So this mesoappendix runs from between the terminal portion of the ileum and the appendix. So there are two layers. One of them is called the ileocecal fold or bloodless fold of Trevis, which is used for during surgery, because that is the layer where there are no blood vessels, and this fold extends between the terminal portion of the ileum and the cecum, and probably a little bit, actually to the one of the anterior folds of the mesoappendix. Okay, so this, if you dissect in this, you are unlikely to damage any of the blood vessels, and you can go and actually tie off the appendicular vessels without damaging or without causing much of blood flow, bleeding while you are performing an appendectomy. Okay, this fold of peritoneum or the mesoappendix contains variable amount of fat, and it also uh, contains the nerves and vessels, and it usually ends slightly before the actual tip of the appendix. It may end slightly before the appendicular tip. So apart from this, you may have an extension of this peritoneum going from the terminal ileum to the cecum, which may carry the anterior cecal artery. Okay, and this appendicular artery is usually a direct branch from the ileocolic artery. So you can see here in this diagram, so this is the taenia coli, this one is the free one or the taenia libera, and this is the posterior one or the omental taenia or the taenia omentalis, and this one is towards the mesocolon, so that is called the taenia mesocolica. Taenia, the free taenia or the taenia libera is kind of on the anterior side, and on the posterior side you have the taenia omentalis, and on the medial side or the posteromedial side you will have the taenia mesocolica. But this is true for the ascending colon. When the ascending colon turns turns at the right hepatic flexure, the right colic flexure, it actually, the anterior, the free taenia or the taenia libera becomes kind of inferior, and taenia mesocolica becomes posterior, and taenia omentalis becomes superior. Okay, and at this point where the base is, so the lumen, there is a lumen, small lumen, which is kind of variable or slit like in appearance. When you open and see from the inside the colon or the cecum, the opening of the appendix is kind of slit like, and it is partially covered by the mucosal fold, forming an asymmetrical wall, and the lumen is patent or it is wide in very young age, that is small children, and as you grow older and become an adult and grow older and older, it becomes increasingly narrower and narrower. So that may explain the decreased incidence of appendicitis or acute appendicitis in very young and very old people, because in very old it is kind of almost obliterated, so nothing can actually enter and block it, and in very young it is widely open, so even if something enters it can come out. In kind of like early adolescence or late childhood, it is open enough for things to enter it, but not wide enough for them to come out. So the chances of appendicoliths or fecoliths forming inside the appendix and blocking the lumen of the appendix, and then initiating a inflammatory response leading to acute inflammation of the appendix, is common in the late childhood and early adolescence. Okay, and anomalies of appendix like agenesis or duplication are exceptionally rare. They are not very commonly seen. Okay, so this is one of the common locations where you find the appendix, which is the retrocecal appendix, and you can see sometimes when it is retrocecal, the appendix may be embedded within the wall of the colon, and it complicates surgical removal when that happens. Okay, so In that kind of situation, it is called fixed retrocecal appendix, when there is a merger between the wall of the colon and the uh, cecum and the appendix. Okay, so coming to the blood supply of the appendix, so you can see this is the inferior division of the ileocholic artery. From the ileocholic artery, there is a direct branch going to the appendix, which is the appendicular artery. So appendicular artery is the main vessel that supplies the appendix, and it is a branch directly from the ileocholic artery, and as it comes closer to the base of the appendix, it may give a recurrent branch which may anastomose with the anterior colic or anterior cecal artery. Okay, and then the appendicular artery continues closer to the very closely to the appendix, wall of the appendix, and supplies the appendix all the way up to the tip. And there may be some accessory appendicular vessels which may also supply the appendix, which may come from the anterior cecal artery or from the other arteries. But because this appendicular artery is so closely related to the appendix, whenever there is appendicitis, there is a chance of this appendicular artery being inflamed and becoming thrombosed. When it becomes thrombosed, that will lead to gangrene formation of the appendix, which is supplied by that appendicular artery, because this appendicular artery is like it is an end artery. So when thrombosis of this appendicular artery occurs, you may end up having a gangrenous change in the appendix, and that leads to perforation and peritonitis, generalized peritonitis. That is why inflammation of appendix can be life-threatening. That is why an emergency appendectomy is performed whenever there is a suspected appendicitis. So sometimes there may be some accessory appendicular arteries, and rarely the appendicular artery may also arise from the cecal artery or an ileal artery, when it does not arise directly from the ileocholic artery. And the venous drainage is along with the similar veins that accompany the arteries, and ultimately the blood supply or the venous drainage goes into the superior mesenteric vein. And the innervation to the appendix and the visceral peritoneum that covers the appendix is derived from the 10th thoracic segment. This autonomic, that is sympathetic supply, is from the 10th thoracic segment, and the parasympathetic is from the vagus nerve. So the sympathetic nerves, which carry the pain sensation from the appendix and the visceral peritoneum, since they arise from the 10th spinal segment, they supply this autonomic nerve supply the entire or most of the gastrointestinal tract. So whenever at the initial phases of appendicitis, the appendix gets inflamed and you feel pain around, a generalized diffuse pain around the umbilicus, because it is not very well localized. The autonomic innervation is not very well localized because it supplies all of the intestines. So because of this reason, initially the pain is not localized and it can be around the umbilicus, and it is supplied by the 10th spinal segment autonomic nerves. But as the inflammation progresses, inflammation spreads from the visceral peritoneum to the parietal peritoneum and the surrounding structures. When that happens, the parietal peritoneum, being supplied by the somatic nerves, gets inflamed, and that localizes the pain to the right iliac fossa. So that is why initially in the appendicitis, you have periumbilical pain associated with vomiting, but as inflammation progresses and the parietal peritoneum is involved, then the pain is localized to the right iliac fossa. This is the reason for uh, the kind of non-localized diffuse periumbilical pain seen in the initial stages of appendicitis, which later becomes localized, and rebound tenderness is also seen once it gets localized. So coming to the histology of appendix and colon, so the general architecture or general pattern of uh, GI tract consists of 4 layers. You have a mucosa, then you have submucosa, then uh, you have mucosa, muscularis mucosa, submucosa, and the muscularis externa and serosa. So serosa is common for most of the GI tract which are intra-abdominal. If it is intrathoracic like the esophagus, that may not contain the serosa because there is no serous layer covering the esophagus. So esophagus has no serosa, the thoracic part. The abdominal part does have serosa a little bit. Okay, so from that point onwards, there is a outer layer, serosal layer, which is the mesothelium of the peritoneum, which covers all the GI tract except when the part of the GI tract is completely retroperitoneal. Even if it is retroperitoneal, the anterior layer of this GI tract may be covered by the serosa. So you have serosa, then inside that, under the serosa, you will have the muscularis externa, and between the layers of muscularis externa, you will have a plexus of autonomic ganglia, and then inside that you will have the submucosa, and deep to that submucosa you will have the muscularis mucosa, then lamina propria, then the mucosa proper. Okay, so the innermost is the lumen. Inside the mucosa you have the mucosa forms the surface of the lumen. So through that the GI tract communicates with the exterior. Appendix also has exactly similar architecture, except there are some variations. So the layers of wall of the appendix are very similar to those of the large intestine in general, but with some notable differences. That is, the serosa forms a complete covering. If you notice the large intestine, most of the large intestine is adherent to the posterior abdominal wall. So the posterior aspect of the large intestine does not have a serous layer, only the anterior part has. So here the appendix, since it is free, it can have a complete 360-degree covering of the serosa, except where there is a mesoappendix attached. Okay. The submucosa is typically contains large lymphoid aggregates that may extend into the mucosa and disrupt the integrity of the muscularis mucosae. So this is not like the colon. In the colon, you do have lymphoid aggregates, but they are not so large and they don't disrupt the mucosal integrity or the epithelial integrity. So in the appendix, you will have large lymphoid aggregates. That is typical of the appendix, and the outer longitudinal muscle is a complete layer of uniform thickness. Unlike in the colon, you have in the colon there is outer longitudinal layer, but which is very thin, and there are 3 bands of this muscularis externa, that is outer longitudinal muscle, which form aggregate or concentrated bands of smooth muscle, which are called taenia coli. So except in very few places, the outer longitudinal muscle is a complete uniform layer, except in few small areas where the muscularis externa is deficient in the appendix, allowing the serosa to come in contact with the submucosa. And if you see the this is a very low power magnified image of the appendix, showing the entire appendix transverse section. This is the lumen, and lumen, you can see the epithelium lining the lumen. You will have those crypts or the intestinal glands going down, epithelial surface is usually luminal surface is usually smooth with multiple small pits, which actually are the openings of these crypts of Lieberkühn. So that forms the mucosa, and mucosa sits on this basement membrane, and there is a little bit of lamina propria. Under the lamina propria you will have the muscularis mucosa. But what you can see here is there are large lymphoid follicles or lymphoid aggregates just under the mucosa, and some of them enter or disrupt the mucosa and come up to the luminal surface. So there is infiltration of lymphocytes into the mucosa, extensive infiltration, and under that muscularis mucosa you have this kind of connective tissue layer, which is the submucosa, in which you will find another nerve plexus and blood vessels and nerves, and then you have the muscularis externa, which has an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal, continuous outer longitudinal layer, except in some places where it may be deficient. And you'll find that there is there is a serosa all around here, but where the mesoappendix is attached, there you will not find the serosa. Okay, so that is the appearance of the appendix, and this is slightly enlarged to show the epithelium and the lymphocyte infiltration into the epithelium. So that is the mucosa, then this is the submucosa, and you can see the lymphoid aggregates extending from mucosa to the submucosa, and lymphoid follicles or lymphoid nodules clearly having a germinal center. And here you can see the mucosal the glands, the intestinal glands containing plenty of the goblet cells and the absorptive cells. And at the bottom you may find some enteroendocrine or neuroendocrine cells. So the mucosa is covered by the columnar epithelium, which contains M cells, which overlies the mucosal lymphoid tissue, and glands or the crypts of Lieberkühn, which are similar to the colon, but these are fewer in number. The crypts are not as abundant as you see in the colon, and they penetrate deep into the lamina propria. This is slightly higher magnification. You can see the outer longitudinal muscle layer, then the inner circular muscle layer of the muscularis externa, then you have the submucosa, which has these blood vessels, and then you have the lamina propria, and you can see these glands or the crypts, and you can see the lymphoid follicles with germinal centers. Okay, the submucosal lymphoid tissue frequently exhibits germinal center within its follicles, and it is indicative of whenever there is a germinal center in any lymphoid follicle, it indicates that there is B cell activation, and that means these are producing antibodies basically, and they are involved in immune response. And these lymphoid follicles are absent at the birth, but they go on accumulating as you grow older for the first 10 years of life, and then in the adults the follicles gradually atrophy, and in the elderly the lumina of appendix may be partially obliterated by fibrous tissue. So considering all of this, the appendix is not a vestigial organ. It plays an important role in immune response, and along with that it acts like a reservoir. As you can see in this image, there is something in the lumen. So this material, that whatever is in the lumen of the appendix, is rich in the intestinal flora or the normal bacterial flora that actually inhabit the colon. So this appendix acts like a reservoir, and whenever you suffer from gastroenteritis, severe gastroenteritis, which washes off all of the intestinal flora, the contents of the appendix, like whatever bacteria are present within the appendix, they act like a reservoir and they replenish the normal gut microbiome after any infection. Okay, so it is not a completely vestigial organ. But considering the fact that people do live normal lives, almost normal lives, when the appendix is removed, you can say, yeah, it doesn't, removing the appendix does not lead to any long term consequences or significant consequences. Okay, but there is a recent uh, evidence suggesting that removing the appendix may lead to some uh, neurological, or we can say psychiatric uh, problems. Chronic depression is one of those which is linked to appendectomies. People who have undergone appendectomies tend to be more tend to develop some of the neurological disorders that have been described, and very recently from 2015 onwards. So that is the histology of appendix. So coming to the histology of the colon, here you can see the colon also has very similar appearance. It has this serosal layer. Then you have the muscularis externa. There is a very thin layer of longitudinal outer muscularis externa. Then there is inner circular layer which is quite prominent. Then you have the submucosa and the mucosa. Submucosa contains blood vessels and the nerve cells. But what you can notice here is in the muscularis externa, there is a thick concentration of outer longitudinal muscle fibers forming the taenia coli. So this band is the taenia coli. Okay, and covering outside that is the serosa. Okay, so there is muscularis externa, the outer longitudinal layer, and the muscularis externa circular layer, the submucosa, then the lamina propria and muscularis mucosa, then the mucosa layer. So if you look at the mucosa, you can see it is kind of smooth, but it has regularly placed intestinal glands, or openings of intestinal glands are regularly placed, and if you follow the intestinal openings, you enter the intestinal glands. So these are called the crypts of Lieberkühn, which are lined by mainly two or three types of cells. Usually you will have abundant goblet cells, which are in proportion about 4:1 compared to the intestinal absorptive cells. There are enterocytes which are very similar to the small intestinal enterocytes, which are absorptive in nature. So there are 4 enterocytes to 1 goblet cell in these crypts as well as in the surface. But as you go towards the luminal surface of these crypts or the intestinal glands, you notice the goblet cells becoming thinner and thinner, and they almost are empty or devoid of mucin when they reach the surface. They migrate from the bottom of the intestinal glands or the crypts of Lieberkühn, because it is in the bottoms of these crypts of Lieberkühn that there are cells or the stem cells which are responsible for regenerating or replenishing the intestinal mucosa. So by every 5th day, intestinal mucosa keeps getting replenished. Okay, so it takes about 5 days for one of the cells that is newly divided from a stem cell to reach the top and get removed, or kind of die out and go into the intestinal lumen. So the goblet cells are also derived from these stem cells, and the goblet cells go on accumulating mucin, and they also keep on secreting the mucin. Initially the secretion is not very fast, so they accumulate more and more mucin, so they become prominent in the middle of the intestinal glands, and as you come towards the lumen, the secretion becomes so fast that the production of mucin cannot keep up with it, so they become exhausted, and these exhausted cells appear very slender, devoid of any mucin, and they may have very small amounts of mucin. So these are called tuft cells. Okay, and apart from that, you will also have M cells and neuroendocrinal cells, which are present at the bottoms of, or the near the close to the muscularis mucosa, which is very close, which is at the bottom of the intestinal crypts. So you will have absorptive cells, then you will have M cells, then Paneth cells are not seen in the colon of human beings, and apart from that, you will have the goblet cells. And as you go from the colon towards the rectum, the proportion of goblet cells to the absorptive cells goes on increasing, meaning the goblet cells become more and more, and they may reach 1:1 ratio by the time you reach the rectum, because as the digested food and undigested food, whatever is remaining in the colon, gets pushed down towards the rectum, it becomes increasingly harder, because what is the main function of colon? To reabsorb whatever water was there in the digested food. So the feces is formed, and as it gets pushed down, it becomes harder and harder, because water is continuously being absorbed along with the electrolytes also, like the sodium and potassium, they are also absorbed. So when active transport of this takes place, the feces becomes harder, so it needs to be lubricated. So goblet cells produce mucin for lubrication. Okay, so you'll find absorptive cells are the enterocytes, then goblet cells and M cells, and the neuroendocrine cells. Within the lamina propria, you will see lymphocyte infiltration, basically just like any other part of the intestine or the GI tract. You will have gut associated lymphoid tissue. At some places you may also find some lymphoid aggregates like lymphoid follicles also. Okay, so this is the intestinal epithelium, and these are the crypts, and you have the muscularis mucosa here, then the submucosa. This is slightly higher magnification. This upper part is a lower magnification. And this is a schematic. You can see this is the luminal surface of the intestine, and you can see this is the bottom of the crypt. You can find goblet cells and neuroendocrine cells at the near the bottom. Then there are stem cells, and there are absorptive cells, which are the principal type of cells, and you will also find some lymphoid follicles. Okay, so that is the microscopy of, or microscopic anatomy of colon. You can see slightly higher magnification. There are M cells here, and apart from the M cells, you have the goblet cells, and between them, whatever the tall columnar cells that you see, these are the intestinal absorptive cells. So this is an absorptive cell. You can see the brush border on these absorptive cells, and then there are goblet cells which appear like wine goblets, which appear kind of empty because the mucin doesn't take up much time. Okay, so that is about the histology of large intestine. So there is a video of acute